Fear and greed, what to watch out for in a constantly changing market environment. This is the first of a two-part series on this topic. I'm Jason Schmidt, and this is the Weekly Mail. Market transitions, whether to the upside or downside, are almost always characterized by a sharp change in attitude and behavior, and today is no different. There are several behavioral indicators we can observe and straightforward business practices we can put into place to get out in front of common challenges we encounter during a continually shifting market period. And we're going to highlight two situations that address these elements and what to do when we encounter someone operating from a place of fear or greed. But before we go any further, please remember to like and subscribe to stay up to date with our real estate and financial market news. Fear and greed indices, developed by a slew of different outlets from CNN to crypto to general investment houses, are designed to capture market sentiment for the purpose broadly of identifying the best times to buy or sell. And while there is value in that information within housing markets, we use these concepts of fear or greed to measure the underlying drivers of decisions that are made by either a buyer or seller, or even a broker or an agent. And when we intentionally, and let me say that again, intentionally, approach a situation or transaction conscious of what is driving behavior, we're often a bit more relaxed when we're presented with something that may not make sense or that we just don't like. So what is fear and greed? Well, they highlight the emotional undertones we can look to in order to understand from what vantage point one party or the other may be making their decisions. Simply put, fear is not wanting something to happen, while greed is wanting something to happen. From an emotional perspective, we can also think of this as the difference between pursuing and being pursued. Today, we are seeing these emotions play out at farther ends of the spectrum than we ordinarily would when market conditions are less stressed. Much like our political systems today, these two extremes in our motivation systems are not the most prevalent, but they are the noisiest, the most distracting, and at times, the most dangerous. I'll give you two recent examples of this. Both involve transactions where our firm represented a buyer, and in both, we discovered disclosure issues, which for 2022 was the year the National Association of Realtors coined it the year disclosure became the top legal issue. I've dealt with several disclosure issues over the years, but even I was shocked to learn that one study found 60% of sellers knowingly failed to disclose issues when selling. We have disclosure conversations all the time, which is why our firm has required notices that accompany our contract documents and inform homeowners of disclosure and defect laws, but I wouldn't have guessed 60%. So in the first instance, one of fear, the issue involved the seller directly. There was no other brokerage involved. In normal course, an agent in our firm identified a property that fit the general criteria of this buyer. They toured the property, seemingly, all boxes were checked, and they made an offer with very little negotiation back and forth. Prior to making that offer, however, our agent performed normal research on the property. When it was purchased, for how much, searching, permitting, and financial records, etc. Also, an offer can be prepared in as best an informed position as possible. During that search, it was discovered that the unit was being offered at a price below where it was purchased only a year and a half or so prior to it being put on the market for sale. This is not common, particularly when value is not declining, but also not something earth-shattering. Usually, a life event is the driver of such a circumstance and can sometimes require actions out of the ordinary. So during the short negotiation period, the seller disclosed to our agent they were planning on moving out of state for work and a family issue and needed to move quickly. And this is where the eyebrows started to lift a bit. The agent for our firm and myself had spoken both prior to and after their offer was made. Going in, they were nervous the offer wouldn't be accepted. The property hadn't been on the market very long. It was a very nice unit. It was priced under value, both in market terms and relative to the initial purchase price. And the seller was representing themselves, allowing for direct communication with the principal rather than needing to deal with an intermediary. That's like the unicorn of conditions all coming together at the same time. After the short negotiation, our agent indicated to me that something seemed a little off with the seller. There was seemingly an effort to just shuttle this deal through with very little consideration for customary seller concerns, like getting the highest price and having terms that are favorable to the seller. So now they're under contract and inspections are scheduled. Our agent and the inspector arrive on the scheduled day and the inspector goes to work. Just a side note here, this was a multi-level townhome development with several connected units. So now the inspector is doing his thing until finally he gets to the top floor. He's about to go into what you would call the attic, but it's more like this hatch crawl space sort of area between the top floor and the roof. I wasn't there, but I was later told that throughout the inspection, the seller was hovering around the inspector and followed him everywhere. Again, not super common, but not altogether odd either. Even if they're selling, some people just don't like other people wandering around their house. So as the inspector is about to go into this space, the seller stops him and says that area is off limits and that they have personal effects in the attic. The inspector obliged and moved on, though he later made mention of this to our agent, who keyed in on the inspector missing this important area of the inspection: the interior of the roof structure. It isn't uncommon for an inspector to provide a short verbal overview of the inspection immediately after, which in this case was given to our agent. And this is where the previous eyebrow raises transition to full-blown suspicion. Home inspectors nowadays use some pretty cool tools: cameras that can reach deep into crawl spaces, infrared scanners that look for moisture, heat detectors that can identify areas that may need to be sealed to the outdoors, and many others. In our case, the moisture detector is what brought all of this together. There were indications of potential water intrusions within a number of walls throughout the unit. In these scans, it can sometimes be hard to tell whether these indications are actual issues or if they're something else. Here, though he couldn't say for certain without the walls being opened up, the inspector was pretty adamant that a contractor specializing in leak detection or water mitigation should be brought in. Anyone who has been involved in a transaction where this type of news is received knows now is when we slam on the brakes. Until this question can be answered, no one is moving forward. Now, let me pause here. The handful of days in between our buyer going under contract and the inspection provided an opportunity for our agent to get to know the seller a bit. And it's kind of a sad story. Something that I've experienced as being hard for the general public to understand about the practice of real estate on the residential side is the people and stories we encounter and how they affect so much of what goes on. The seller in this case was an older woman who had lost her husband about a year prior to this transaction. This condo was going to be where they lived for the rest of their lives. They had downsized to this unit from a large home they lived in for something like 40 years. It was where they raised their family, made all of their memories, and it was very hard for them to let it go. So when they moved into this unit, and her husband having fell ill just a few months into them living there, really sent her into kind of a dark place. As it turned out, she really wasn't moving for work. She was moving to live with one of her daughters in the Northeast. Now, when they bought this unit, the contractor who built it used a newer roof engineering design and materials than what are common for this type of construction. Apparently, the roof was not installed properly, and it leaked a lot. That's not great here in Florida because it rains a lot. And the contractor was, at that time, not really in a cooperative mood. He just flatly refused to take responsibility for it and blamed it on the roofing subcontractor, who turned around and blamed it on the general contractor. So, as you would expect, a bunch of lawyers got involved and everything got more complicated. So here is this woman who was supposed to spend her golden years with her husband, who unexpectedly passed, in this new condo that turned out to be very poorly constructed, with no local family and no real support system to speak of, and who is now subject to the outcome of what will very likely be a long and protracted legal battle. She was desperate and terrified. She feared that this condo was going to take everything from her, what little she had left, and she didn't know what to do other than to try and sell it and just get away from it. The market changed very quickly in 2022, and she worried about value, fearing that she may never be able to get out of it, that she would end up so upside down, she would be stuck forever in this place where she lost her husband and now potentially her financial future. Unfortunately, it just so happened that her way of doing this was questionable. So if we now pick back up at the inspector telling our agent there was very likely water intrusion, our agent immediately went to the seller and said, "We need to get to the bottom of this or we can't move forward. We need to extend the buyer's inspection period. We need to get a contractor out here to look at this. We need to get on the roof, open up a wall or two." All of the things you would normally do. And that's when she broke down and spilled the beans about the contractor and the water damage and there being no light at the end of the tunnel and her fear and worries and not knowing how her life was going to end up and on and on and on. It was quite a dramatic breakdown from what I was told. At this point, and for obvious transactional reasons, our agent took that buyer elsewhere and terminated the contract, but she didn't abandon the seller. When I was filled in on the very dramatic nature of this story, my first reaction was just, wow. It can be very easy to become cynical in this business with the stories we hear from people about why they did this or why they didn't do that or why they feel like it's okay to lie to people. So after wow, my first question was, is it true? As it turned out, it was. So we connected her with a lawyer we do business with who took a look at everything and, on what could be described as a virtually pro bono basis, agreed to help her. The early suspicions our agent had, not yet knowing the full scope of the problem, alerted her to needing to pay very close attention to what the seller was or was not doing. She was fortunate in this case in her ability to be able to communicate directly with the seller rather than communicating with another agent or broker. She took that as an opportunity to form a relationship and get to know the seller as best she could during that small amount of time she had. And it was during that time, she says, that it became clear the seller was worried about something. She was fearful. What we see in this business is fear manifest itself in a variety of ways. People respond and react to fear uniquely. Whether it is the fear of the unknown, fear of cost and time, fear of the future, we see it play out all the time. And that is just a part of managing people in the real estate industry. You're managing a very emotional and expensive element of their lives. In this case, the desperate and hopeless feelings experienced by the seller led her to abandon what would otherwise be her well-grounded moral compass. In tears, she apologized, and I don't say this for dramatic flair, pleaded with our agent for forgiveness. It was her genuine sorrow at the convergence of all these life events that I think led us to step in and help when we otherwise would have left someone who had done what she had done to their own devices. And I just have to say, I am very proud of how our team handled this situation. It could have gone so very wrong in so many ways, but it didn't. The seller reimbursed the buyer for the cost of the inspection, and though she still has a road ahead of her, she is in good hands and it will all work out in the end. If you'd like for us to include any specific market information or topic of discussion, please let us know either in the comments or if you are receiving the weekly mail emails, simply reply to that message and let us know. Remember, please like, share, and subscribe to either our social platforms or to the weekly mail email distribution list. With that, I hope to connect with you soon.